Hello everyone, I am Gui Valente and this is the Valente Brothers Podcast. Episode 1, I'm joined by Pedro Valente.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for joining us.
Joaquim Valente.
Hello everyone, thank you very much for watching.
Today, in our first ever podcast, we're going to be talking about our history, where this all began, from Rio de Janeiro all the way to here, South Florida, Miami. Professor Pedro, how did this all begin?
Yes, we can talk about our history without mentioning our ancestors, both on the maternal side and the paternal side. We were very much influenced by some amazing mentors in our family. Our father was the great engineer of Valente Brothers, the bond that unites us so much. And his mentors were his father, our grandfather, Dr. Hélio Valente, and his jiu-jitsu teacher, Grandmaster Hélio Gracie. And they taught him a philosophy. In 1968, he was still 29 years old. He gave an interview already as a successful plastic surgeon in Brazil, where he said that he felt that by having a philosophy of life, that he had an advantage over his peers. And this philosophy was always based on natural living, a healthy lifestyle, healthy nutrition above all. His father was a homeopathic doctor, so already believed in natural medicine. And from the Gracie brothers, more specifically Grandmaster Hélio Gracie, he learned a lot about healthy nutrition. And also as a doctor, he continued to study and develop his knowledge in that field.
Well, when we talk about healthy nutrition and this more natural approach to medicine, I think we have to talk about our grandfather, Dr. Hélio Valente, as well.
Exactly.
I think he played a significant role, not only, of course, in motivating our father towards this practice in the field of medicine, but also, of course, he was the one that introduced our family, the Valente family, into jiu-jitsu.
Exactly. And so when he joined the Academia Gracie to learn jiu-jitsu in Brazil, he was already open to that information and finding a very fertile ground from the work of Grandmaster Hélio Gracie with nutrition, already with the knowledge he had from his father. That was something that definitely motivated him to continue studying, to continue developing, and that was a big part of our education and how we were raised from the time when we were born. I would also like to mention our grandfather on the maternal side, who was also not only a big influence on us, but also a big influence on our father, who liked and respected him very much. They worked together, and he was a very generous man, a very important businessman in Brazil, business leader, who owned a big textile company, and he was known for being extremely generous to his employees, to all of those who worked for him. And so that was a very important influence in our life as well. And we cannot talk about the spiritual side of things without again mentioning our grandfather, Dr. Hélio.
Our maternal grandfather, we're talking about Guilherme da Silveira Filho.
Exactly.
And part of my name, Guilherme da Silveira Valente. So that's important detail.
And his brother, Joaquim. So we are, my brothers, you, Gui, and Joaquim, revived the brotherhood between Joaquim and Guilherme.
But before we jump to the spiritual aspect, which is important also in our philosophy, I think it's important to mention that our father, he first started practicing, his first contact with jiu-jitsu, actually it was a judo school at the time already, had the name judo, was through a very prominent school, a very prominent teacher. When I was at the Kodokan, and I was at the Kodokan Museum, at the library, one of the workers at the library, he showed me a book about Brazilian judo. And the first picture in that book was of our father's first teacher, which was Augusto Cordeiro.
Sensei Cordeiro. He was a very, very prominent judo teacher in Brazil, the official representative of Kodokan Judo in Rio. So that was my father's first school. Actually, the contact of the Valente family with jiu-jitsu begins with our grandfather, who in medical school had a colleague who was from Japan. Brazil's medicine back then was already extremely strong. People came from around the world to learn medicine in Brazil.
Especially because of World War II.
Yes, and even before, when our father was going to school, in the beginning of the 20th century, he already met this Japanese colleague in...
Our grandfather, you mean?
Our grandfather.
Yeah.
And so this Japanese colleague had trained judo in Japan. And so would constantly talk about judo to our grandfather and already showed him some notions of the Japanese martial art. And that triggered our grandfather's interest. So in 1951, when Grandmaster Helio had his prominent fight against Kimura, he took our father to Maracanã Stadium to watch that match. And right after, he enrolled our father in this judo school. He stayed there for a few years and then transferred to the Academia Gracie to learn under the legendary Gracie brothers, Carlos and Hélio Gracie.
Pedro, our dad also always spoke about how our name played an influence in him wanting to join the school and our grandfather putting him to train, right?
Yes, because Valente means brave in the Portuguese language. And so many times in school, kids would ask our father, are you really brave or is it just a name? And many times that fights would break out because of that. And without any knowledge, he was skinny. He would many times not win those fights. And that was one more reason why our grandfather decided to enroll him in martial arts.
So what would he say when somebody asked him, are you really Valente? Are you really brave?
No, it's just a name. That was his humble answer, and he attributed that to his father. He said, that's what I learned. That's what my father told me. When somebody asks you that, just say, no, it's just a name. And that's the best way to answer that question.
I think that through this opportunity, we can go a little bit deeper in all of this history. And for those of you that don't know Brazil, our grandfather, the father of our father, Silo Gomes Valente, Dr. Silo Gomes Valente, he was born in the state of Ceará, right?
In the northeast of Brazil.
And our grandfather, the father of our mother, our maternal grandfather, was born in Rio de Janeiro. And both families, 3 or 4 generations, I think before us, even more, come from Portugal. Is that right?
Yes. On our mother's side, a little bit more recent, but on our father's side, a little bit prior to that. Both in the either late 18th century, beginning of the 19th century.
From North Portugal.
They both come from the northern part of Portugal.
Even though the Valente family name is the original Italian name.
The name is Italian, but the family is of Portuguese origin.
Yes. Professor Joaquim, what do you remember of your beginnings in jiu-jitsu or in the martial arts?
Jiu-jitsu, for me, I don't really have a memory of the first time that I practiced. When I remember, it was already something that was a routine, going to take classes with Grandmaster Hélio and being in my kimono pretty often in Rio de Janeiro, training in the Academia Gracie and taking private classes from him, or being in his home in the mountains of Rio in Taipava. That's something that I remember since being very young, going there to his house and having lunch and training, and really being exposed to jiu-jitsu is something that was not only what we practice on the mat, but also the way we ate, the way we really lived our life. That's something that, when I talk to friends and, people ask, what is jiu-jitsu? I always say that for me, it was always something that involved all aspects of today, what we have put together as being the 753 code, was always the way that I practiced jiu-jitsu.
This is all very interesting because the three of us, actually the four of us, our sister Joanna as well. For those of you that don't know, our brother Pedro's the oldest one. I'm number 2. Joanna is our sister in between myself and Joaquim is our youngest brother. And the four of us, we had the privilege to grow up and have Grandmaster Helio as our grandfather as well. Our grandparents that we just talked about, they passed away early in our lives, and Grandmaster Helio really filled that role. We were also very fortunate to have our grandmothers still around for our growing up. Vovó, that's how we say grandmother in Portuguese. Vovó Temis, she was my dad's mom, and Vovó Maria Alice, she was my mom's mother. But Grandmaster Helio was really like our grandfather. And Joaquim, we're talking about you having the opportunity to really spend time with him a lot in the early 90s, all the way through the early 2000s until you moved to Miami. I had that opportunity in the early 80s, 90s, eventually until I moved here. And Pedro, all the way back in the 70s. So the four of us together, I think that it is fair to say that very few people, if anyone, had this privilege to spend so much time with Grandmaster Helio from the 70s all the way to when he went on his journey, in his spiritual journey.
On this, I think we really need to give credit, and I think the word that Pedro used was perfect, as our dad being an engineer in this, mission of his, and the value that he always gave to Grandmaster Helio. I remember, many times I would go talk to him and asking for advice on something, and he would always obviously give his advice, but he would say, call Grandmaster Helio, talk to Grandmaster Helio, see what he thinks. And he knew how much having Grandmaster Helio in our lives was important, not only for the physical jiu-jitsu, but the mentorship that he would have on us. And he always motivated us to keep and to really, use Grandmaster Helio in a good way of the word as much as we could, because he knew the experience that Grandmaster Helio had in his life and how much that could help us.
100%. Now, as Joaquim just said, Grandmaster Helio, along with our father, they really played a role in organizing not only our martial arts training, but as we were growing up. How was that? How did that all begin? Because you were obviously the first one.
And before I touch on that, as we close this segment on our ancestry, I think it's important that we also talk about our mother, who played a very important role in our upbringing. I think of her dedication to us, and also how she taught us about the importance of culture and education and having good manners. So many great lessons we learned from her. And as we mentioned our grandparents, as we mentioned our parents, as we mentioned Grandmaster Helio and our teachers, I always remember a famous quote by Isaac Newton, which I think defines our success so well. It says, if I can see further, it's only because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. And we Valente Brothers are very thankful, grateful for those who came before us and who gave us so much. And it's true, if we can see further, it's because of those giants who came before us. And we always mention them, and we'll never get tired of mentioning them because they did so much for us. And specifically about this relationship this beautiful friendship between Grandmaster Helio and our father. Our father considered Grandmaster Helio like a second father. He said that several times. But as our father got older, they became friends. They became best friends. We can very comfortably say that Grandmaster Helio was our father's best friend and vice versa. And that relationship played a vital role in our upbringing. And I remember exactly what Joaquim just said. Growing up, our father encouraging us to seek Grandmaster Helio's advice, even though our father always had amazing advice. And also Grandmaster Helio showing so much respect for our father and his ideas and his opinions, and many times seeking our father's advice. And they both had great respect for each other, and they both felt really, really grateful for each other. And that was beautiful for us to see and to observe how many times they complemented each other in so many ways, and how they were in line with many of the philosophical principles, how they agreed on so many of these principles that make up who we are today.
Yeah, you just touched on something that is, I think, very, very important. And I think that through the episodes, we're going to be really trying to share with our friends, with our audience, what was transmitted to us, what we learned from our mentors, from our teachers. And our father taught us the value, the importance of learning from those that have experience, from those that many times have lived through many of the life circumstances, many of the experiences that we will be living, that we will be facing in our lives. And especially in jiu-jitsu, it was a good example of that. Many times in different fields, there is a tendency for us to want to listen to want to learn from those that at that moment are the most famous, are the most successful. But our father always advised us to listen to Grandmaster Helio's words of wisdom, of experience. So with that, let's go back in time. And what are your memories of when you first started practicing jiu-jitsu? I think even the first time that you spent time with Grandmaster Helio, I think you were very young and you went to Grandmaster Helio's home.
Yes, and as you were just explaining this, I remember that this is also a very, very Japanese principle, to respect your elders, to listen to your elders, not only to respect, but to learn from your elders, to appreciate experience. So from a very young age, we love to spend time with our parents, with our grandparents, and with Grandmaster Helio. And as you mentioned, my first time sleeping away from our house was in 1980. I was 5 years old, and I went to sleep at Grandmaster Helio's ranch in Itaipava. And I remember clearly, even though I was only 5 years old, he drove us there with his wife, Dona Margarida, and we spent a wonderful weekend there, riding horses, playing with his dogs, practicing jiu-jitsu on the mats. I remember that I had a kimono. He had several kimonos there ready for us to use, and there was one my size, and training with him. At the time, he used to put a tarp over the grass, and so we used to train on that tarp. And he also invited a friend of mine who was also 5 years old to go, who used to train with me. Olímpio Faisal was a famous dentist in Brazil, and his son, who was my age, also went. So we trained together. He would put both of us to spar.
So it was Olímpio Faisal Jr.
Yes. And so we trained together, and it was a wonderful experience. And then he brought me back, and he left me in my apartment where I used to live back then, and that was something very special for me, because even though I was just 5 years old, I felt like I was sleeping, away from home, and that was something that I'll never forget.
Very well.
And it also shows the trust that that our parents had in Grandmaster Helio to allow me at 5 years old to go sleep.
I think that's also the first time, yours as well, the first time I
Yes.
slept away from home was at Grandmaster Helio's house.
Also same.
Yeah. So, martial arts wise, we're talking now about in your case, Pedro, we're talking about the late 70s towards the early 80s. This is a very significant period in the history of jiu-jitsu in Brazil. Why is that, Joaquim?
I think that it's a time that jiu-jitsu went really through a transformation. There were a lot of changes. I wasn't born at that time, but from talking to, friends and people that were living during that time, and also through research, we see that the transformation happened in a slow, but at the same time, quite fast. If you look at history and the time that jiu-jitsu had been practiced and the way that it was practiced, and even in Brazil, Grandmaster Hélio Gracie and Carlos Gracie staying true to jiu-jitsu as a self-defense art, but then by the influence of some external factors, I think even the influence that judo had in the world at that time, you saw that really causing a change and influencing a change in jiu-jitsu. There was a big event that happened in Brazil in judo that really, we could say that was a changing point, right? Professor Pedro?
That sparked.
Yes. First, the Olympics. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Federation of BJJ was first created at the time, Federação de Jiu-Jitsu do Estado da Guanabara, the Guanabara state, that it happened only 3 years after the Olympic Games.
Tokyo, 1964.
When judo was introduced as an Olympic sport. And then what Joaquim just mentioned is that in 1965, if I'm not mistaken, the World Championship of Judo took place in Rio, in Maracanãzinho. And that was a big event in Brazil. Grandmaster Helio went to watch. Our father was there watching. The best judo players in the world were competing in Rio. And I think that motivated the Gracies to start pushing jiu-jitsu as a sport, creating the federation. And their objective was for jiu-jitsu to grow as judo was growing. They didn't want to stay behind.
When you say Gracies, I think it's fair for us to say that especially the younger generation and also some other members of the academy at that time that saw in judo, that saw the judo format, the tournament format as also a possible route for jiu-jitsu.
No question. The Gracie brothers, Grandmasters Carlos and Hélio Gracie, were already getting older at that time. And what was modern at the time, what was considered modern and cutting edge, was competition, sportive competition. There was a huge growth of Olympic competition. Economically, it grew a lot at that time. And so there was pressure, I think, coming from the younger generations. And the Gracie brothers agreed to be part of that movement.
So when Joaquim said slow and fast, I agree.
Yes.
Because this started in 1967. So if you, depending how you look at time, right? Time is very relative. But it was really towards the 70s and especially the 80s that sport jiu-jitsu started to gain some momentum. I think that it's very fair to say that it was in the 90s that it really picked up. But as we were growing up and as we were learning, there was already a huge sportive influence, especially in the practice of jiu-jitsu in the group class format. We grew up always having private lessons with Grandmaster Helio, eventually with some of his sons as well. I think that through time, several of his sons, most notably, later, Helio Gracie. But the group class format was really a preparation for sport competition. And how did that, Pedro, really influence our martial arts training?
What happens is that sportive competition of any kind, especially when it's practiced at a high level, requires specialization. And our father trained jiu-jitsu in the 50s. And if you go back to the 30s, when Grandmaster Hélio Gracie first started teaching, there are several interviews where he defines very clearly what was his ideal in teaching jiu-jitsu. And he always said, our ideal is to teach jiu-jitsu as an art of self-defense, not as a sport. Grandmaster Hélio was very clear about this. And he even said that the reason why they fought was to prove that jiu-jitsu was effective as a tool as a weapon of self-defense and not as a competition sport. And when our father learned in the 1950s, that was the objective of his training. And jiu-jitsu was presented as a complete fighting system. Not only grappling, but also striking and throwing.
And it's important to connect, I think, what Joaquim mentioned. The reason why the Valente family joined initially judo, our grandfather with his experience with the Japanese colleague. But what was the issue? The name Valente was self-defense. It was actually, for my father as a young kid, it was how to deal with the bullies.
Absolutely right. And so our father found in jiu-jitsu a great tool to increase his self-confidence and to be able to deal with those bullies. That worked for him. And he always attributed a lot of his success in medicine to jiu-jitsu and to the confidence that jiu-jitsu gave him. And he felt that that confidence came from his belief in his ability to defend himself and to face any person without feeling intimidation.
Now, how is this training complete? He often talked about what he did at the school. Our father actually was invited. He had the opportunity a few times to represent the Academia Gracie in some challenge matches. But he also talked about what he witnessed, watching some of the more prominent fighters preparing for Vale Tudo matches.
And even before that, one of his first experiences with jiu-jitsu in his early months of training was with a bully from the street where he lived. And João Alberto Barreto, Grandmaster João Alberto, who was teaching most of his lessons at the time, actually took him to fight with the bully. And he was able to defeat the bully in a challenge match. So he was prepared at the school to be able to fight and to be able to face someone who was constantly bothering him, constantly bullying him.
In a street scenario.
In a street scenario.
Old school.
Yes. And so that's how his jiu-jitsu journey begins. And that is very important to define his jiu-jitsu path.
Let me just highlight this because it's very interesting. And I think that maybe this nowadays would be very difficult to happen. But Grandmaster João Alberto Barreto, who is a great teacher, went on then to become a great psychologist, sports psychologist. He was just a few years older than our father. And understanding the situation and understanding how that maybe had even the potential of causing trauma, psychological trauma on our father, he found a way to have our father prepared him and then had our father fight this kid. And I asked him about that. He said, no, I really made sure that there was no injuries. It was safe. Yeah, it was safe.
And that they shook hands in the end.
Correct. So it was a lesson to our father that he could do it. And it was a lesson to this other kid that if you bully someone, there's always the risk that you're going to be punished for it. So, but comparing this period to what we then experienced in the group classes, what our father saw, because it's also important to mention, to give our friends a little bit of an idea of what happened in the time. So our father practiced from the 50s to the 60s, early 60s, when he became a student at a federal university of Rio de Janeiro as a medical student.
Correct. And at the time, just to highlight this moment, this period, as you asked, a lot of people think that Grandmaster Helio was close-minded, but he wasn't. There were boxing coaches teaching
in the 50s.
In the 50s.
And we know that even
the
before.
Academia Gracie,
but
in the 30s as well.
Yes.
In the 50s, Grandmaster Helio was very well versed with kicks, and I'm sure that came from a capoeira influence as well. One of his favorite kicks was a crescent kick to the face, which is typical of capoeira. We use the name pisão for the side kick, the classic jiu-jitsu side kick. The name pisão was the name that was used for that kick in capoeira.
Even though we can see this kick in several
other styles,
even
including
Japanese, old
Atemiwaza.
Japanese before it came to Brazil.
Correct. And throwing techniques. He often told us about Tada, who was a Japanese judo black belt who gave him a lot of knowledge on throwing techniques as well. So Grandmaster Helio was extremely well-rounded and open-minded. And at that time in the 50s, when Carson Gracie was participating in several fights, and other, João Alberto Barreto as well, Hélio Vigio, Pedro Emetério, Robson Gracie, so many others, the focus was on teaching a complete system. Then our father goes to study medicine. When I'm born, actually a little bit before he comes back.
Actually, once he graduated, he also went to the United States, came to the United States and also to Europe to do some specialization courses and training.
Correct. And so when he comes back, and he was away exactly when the federation was formed and when this transformation that Joaquim mentioned occurred. So when he comes back, he witnesses something that's a little bit different than what he was used to. And as I grow up in the 70s, he always wanted me to learn jiu-jitsu as he had learned. But he noticed that it had become a little bit more specialized on the ground. Obviously not Grandmaster Helio's private lessons, but especially as I started attending group classes, the tournaments had become the main focus, no question. And with this specialization, obviously, you cannot have the same focus on other aspects.
And let me also point out that for our teacher, Grandmaster Helio, self-defense always remained very important. Always remained very important. At one point, yes, because of his competitive nature, he enjoyed and he accepted this push towards sport competition. But what really triggered our father's interest, what made him even want to come back to jiu-jitsu once he became a doctor and he started his business, and once he started even planning to have a family and to have a child, was not only the self-defense, but the lifestyle.
Absolutely.
What was behind all
Maybe
of that.
even more important.
More. I think we can even talk about how when our father was still, I think, a teenager, and he learned about the eating habits of Grandmaster Helio and Carlos, he would come home with his fruits, and he would place his fruits in the fridge, and then later when he would return, his mom would have already used those fruits to prepare a dessert, and his battle to try to really incorporate all of those new and very different ways to his life. So I think that was important to mention.
And that was our father's vision, philosophy and self-defense. And as I started to grow up, when I was 8 years old, I participated in my first tournament because Grandmaster Helio at the time was the president of the federation and encouraged me to participate. And luckily I did well. I won. It was 3 matches. And then I did another one. But at that point, because our father and Grandmaster Helio, they would have very deep conversations about jiu-jitsu, about strategy, about the role of jiu-jitsu in our lives and the lives of practitioners. Very deep conversations. And in those conversations, I think they both started to conclude that if jiu-jitsu remained in that path, a lot of the other aspects would slowly be forgotten. And especially our father wanted for us to be complete jiu-jitsu practitioners. Not only the philosophy, which was so important to him, the eating habits, the philosophical principles, the ethical and moral values, the emotional balance and fortitude, very stoic principles that were passed on to us from a very early age. But also the scope of the training, not only including grappling, but also striking and also throwing. And because of that specialization, our father suggested that we started training in boxing, striking techniques, and before that, judo for the throwing techniques. This was discussed with Grandmaster Helio, and Grandmaster Helio agreed because he understood that at that time, the training at the school was not really emphasizing those elements.
So tell us about this episode in one of the tournaments that you participated. Our father being a very competitive person and a very competitive dad, and you having a match with this other boy who apparently threw you a bunch of times.
Yeah, so my first match, and I still remember the adrenaline and having to face that moment, was against this kid that Grandmaster Helio had already told me that he had been the champion before, and he was very good. And so the match started. He went for a throw, a hip throw, and I was able to catch him in a rear naked choke standing up. And I got a prize for the fastest match in that tournament. It was 21 seconds. Rickson had beat someone in 23 seconds. And I got the prize for the fastest match for 21 seconds. I was 8 years old. Rickson was already in the adult division. And that was my first match. I was very excited, very confident. And then I went to fight in that same day, my second match. And the match starts, and right off the bat, boom, the kid throws me down with a beautiful throw and stays on his feet, doesn't follow up with grappling. I stand up. I try to improve my base. He throws me again. And then again. And then again. I think he threw me like 5 or 6 times. A throw in sport jiu-jitsu, 2 points. And so the match was already like 12-0. And for my age and my belt, I was a yellow belt, the matches were 3 minutes long. And with about 10 seconds left in that match, he threw me for the last time. But this time he decided to pin me. And I was able to reverse, mount. He lifted his arm, and with 1 second left in the match, I caught him in the arm lock and he tapped. That allowed me to go to the finals. And then in the finals, I actually had a match against one of my best friends from school who was also a student at the Academia Gracie, Gianni Gentili. And I wasn't able to submit him in the finals, and I beat him by points, and I was able to win that. But that triggered even more our father to want me as quickly as possible to improve my throwing techniques. And he talked to Grandmaster Helio about enrolling me in a judo school with Sensei Ney Wilson, who is currently...
Yeah, who all 3 of us, actually all 4 of us, Joanna as well, trained with. Joaquim, how was...
And he's one of the leaders at the Judo Confederation right now.
Still
the Olympic,
today, I think, the general manager of the Brazilian national team. How was your experience training? At that point, I think I still trained at the old club at Santa Luzia, but eventually we went to Sion, Colégio Sion. It was a school, a private school, very close to where we lived in Laranjeiras.
It was great because it was very close from home, and I usually trained there on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I trained jiu-jitsu Mondays and Wednesdays, and I trained there on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And it was always a great experience. I was always very happy because sometimes showing up to class, I used to see Heuler downstairs, and he used to go there also to focus and improve his stand-up game. And
this is mid-90s? Mid to late 90s, probably,
yes.
Right?
Yes. Which Heuler was competing at that time a lot. And, I think he also felt the same, need that we described earlier to be able to improve on his stand-up. and it was a great class. Classes always began with a very good warm-up, and then we would work on technique. Then we would have the handori, and
That's sparring in Japanese.
Sparring in Japanese, and then after class, or in the end of class, we would always play a cool game. You know, the classes were very full. I remember at one point having, 40, almost 50 kids training together. And then the class would finish. I would go home, have my juice, finish homework, and go to school next day.
Yeah, judo was always, I think, continues to be very, very positive martial art option for children. I think it's a great discipline. It offers great discipline, offers great self-defense as well, because the throwing ability and the ability to control someone on the floor.
Yes, and a lot of our youth program is modeled after some of the etiquette and the culture of the judo group classes that we took.
Now, Joaquim mentioned Hélio being around sometimes. This reminds me of your experience in another judo club. You trained at a club called Flamengo, which we don't like too much.
We don't like the soccer team.
Exactly. Actually, I don't like anything about that club. But
I like my memories training there.
Yeah, I like my memories in the judo mat too, but swimming as well. But yeah, the best soccer team in Brazil is Vasco da Gama. But with that said, how was that experience? Because you were still just a young teenager and having the opportunity to train at an adult class with Olympians and with Hélio being a student at that dojo, at that judo school.
Yes, that was in the late 80s. An amazing experience for me. I was always tall for my age. So a lot of people looked at me and thought I was older than what I really was. So I was 13 years old, 14 years old, and people thought I was an adult. And that meant that they did not take it easy on me. Also there was a big rivalry between judo and jiu-jitsu back then. So coming from a jiu-jitsu background and people knowing that, they would definitely not take it easy on me. I remember one time, we never wore our jiu-jitsu kimonos with a logo, with a patch on the back, because that was considered disrespectful. And Hélio always made sure to tell me, don't go in there with our patch. And one time I did. I forgot. We would actually sometimes turn our kimonos inside out so the patch wouldn't show. And so I was distracted. I went, and right in the beginning, the initial bow, the head teacher, he said, "Pedro, stand up." And I stood up, and he said, "Turn around." And I turned around, and he's like, "Everyone, look at that patch on the back. You know what that means." And Hélio looked at me like he wasn't happy. And so I had to, it wasn't easy that day for me. But it was an amazing experience. As you said, there were Olympians. Frederico Flecha, who was the heavyweight Olympian for the Brazilian team. Ezequiel Paraguaçu, who is...
the reason why many people refer to the choke, the sleeve choke.
Ezequiel, that's the name that became very popular because of him and his expertise in applying that choke. And I was able to witness that several times. And so participating...
Sergio
Sano,
who we trained with.
Who was our teacher, our private teacher as well, who was an Olympian in 1984 LA Games. He competed for Brazil in those Olympic Games.
He would actually come to our home to teach us privates.
Yes, for many years. Yeah. And so that was quite a unique experience, and as much technically, but more physically, and building toughness and learning how to take a beating. And so those are good days.
What about boxing?
Yes, that came a little bit later, in 1990. So I was already 15 years old. Our father would always play with us with strikes, and Grandmaster Helio as well. There were always gloves on the mat, and we would wear those gloves sometimes to exchange strikes and to practice striking in the privates we took with Grandmaster Helio, not in group class.
I think it's important to mention the fact that our father wanted us to learn how to fight and be prepared 100%. But as a doctor, as someone who was very responsible, he also understood the risks, and he really mitigated those two very well, wanting us to learn how to fight, but also safety. And it took him time to really find a school that he approved that would teach us striking skills for obvious reasons. And as martial arts teachers today, we don't want young kids being hit in the head.
Correct. And that's how he mitigated that risk specifically. He mitigated it by instructing us to not get hit in the head.
And of course, we were older already at that point, and he found someone that he trusted, someone that he liked to teach us.
Rafi Giglio, who was our boxing teacher. And I started at 15, but you guys started right when I started, so you started much younger
Joaquim started
than I did.
Super young.
And our sister also trained in boxing. So all of us had this complete upbringing in jiu-jitsu and were prepared to be able to do what we do today, even though I don't know if that was my father's intention. Consciously, I think it wasn't for us to become teachers, but in talking to some of those judo teachers that we just mentioned, specifically Osvaldo Simões was a world champion at the university level and was our teacher as well.
You trained with him at his school?
Yes.
And he also taught judo at our, the American School of Rio de Janeiro, where we went to school. And he was a teacher there in an after-school program.
And we interviewed him more recently, many years after we trained with him, and he said, it felt to me like your father was always preparing you guys to become teachers.
Which wasn't, as you said, we know that wasn't really a conscious plan. What I think, Joaquim and Pedro, is that through good martial arts teachers and through good martial arts programs, you really can help develop great leadership skills in children and as they grow up. I think that we see this here with kids that sometimes join us. They're very shy. Sometimes they have a hard time even talking to someone else. And through that constant development of confidence with so many benefits that the martial arts, that good martial arts skills provide to a child's upbringing, I think that leadership. And of course, as a teacher, you display those leadership skills.
I agree 100%. And I think that, we start to enjoy jiu-jitsu. You start to practice something we enjoy, something that you see your progression and as you want to get better. And I think that the ultimate level of knowledge and understanding of the technique is being able to share. And as you start being able to share that information with other students inside the school, we do this, I think, extremely well here at our school in having the higher belts help the younger belts.
And even in the
children's program.
Which is something based even on a Montessori format that we've studied.
But that gives the chance for people to be able to improve those skills. And as they develop, even people that never thought about becoming a jiu-jitsu teacher, naturally that happens. And we see that happening here with students of ours.
Correct. And if we now move to Miami, when I first came to study at the University of Miami, it was a very unique experience. Here in America, this is very common for kids at 18 years old to move away from home and to go study elsewhere. In Brazil, this is not part of the culture. And our father, when he was in college, his favorite subject, or one of his favorite subjects, was psychology. And as you were speaking, Gui, I started thinking that the most important reason for us to be training jiu-jitsu is because he believed for jiu-jitsu to be the best form of psychological therapy. That was his belief. To really strengthen our minds. And so he wanted me to be prepared to live alone. And so that brought me to Grandmaster Helio's house, where I spent 1 month in preparation to move to the United States.
We have to still go back in time. And we have to talk about 2 other activities. I think we can talk even about our education, our academic education. But there were 2 other activities that were very, very important for our dad. He was also inspired by the brothers Hélio and Carlos, which were the first one, Joaquim. Let's see if this is not planned. So
Horseback riding and swimming. So together, what were all the activities and what was important for our dad, Professor Gui?
Confidence building.
No, I mean all the activities. So it was going to school.
Yeah.
We had to do good in school.
Yeah,
right?
but then the 3 activities outside of academic education, they were fighting through jiu-jitsu, complete jiu-jitsu. By the way, striking, throwing, all of that, our father considered to be jiu-jitsu, and so did Grandmaster Helio.
Yes, and to be fair, our father always adjusted what we learned so that it would fit the jiu-jitsu strategy.
Correct. And by the way, that's what motivated the Valente Brothers methodology, which instead of us having to try to do this on the go as you're learning something and adapt it at the same time, we integrated, bringing back what I think was really the purpose of Grandmaster Helio and, of course, the original jiu-jitsu masters.
And we were very fortunate to have Grandmaster Helio present as we were developing this Valente Brothers system. His supervision, his support, his guidance were amazing.
I remember one time in judo practice being surprised. In class, suddenly I see my dad and Grandmaster Helio both there. I'm like, oh my goodness, let me make sure that I do well today.
That was true for me, because I was always a little bit laid back. That's my personality. And when our father came to watch the training, I used to turn it on like at a completely different speed. And my training partners already knew when our father was there, things would change.
And that's why today, of course, in our school, we have a great area for parents to watch, and we really like, and we want parents to feel very welcome. But sometimes I think it's good also for the children to feel like that they're doing it for themselves.
Correct.
And not for...
To remove the pressure as much as possible.
Pressure.
Yeah. But going back to what Professor Gui was saying, so he was always doing very good in school.
Yes.
My dad valued the academic side above all.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think we can have a very good episode 2 about this. Yeah. And I think that it also came from the side that, he always felt that, we were very involved naturally on the physical aspect of developing confidence, and that he had to push us to do very good in school.
It's the whole person approach.
Let me say something.
It's the whole person approach.
I think that
everything.
Yeah, there are 3 ways. There's 3 different times in our father's life and our mother's too. Circumstances, changes happened. I think that we're talking about early 70s, especially the 80s, then early 90s, and then already the 2000s, late 90s. So I think we all had different experiences as well. I understand what Joaquim is saying, but I kind of agree with Pedro's face.
But you're absolutely right. What you said is perfect. Maybe Joaquim felt that.
Correct.
Because of the circumstances of his time.
Yeah.
And always our father was trying to balance things out and put emphasis on that which he felt was most important.
And sometimes our mom, for obvious reasons, especially in our generation, our father was traveling a lot, he was working a lot, and many times our mom was the one really there, present. So she was the one seeing a lot of what's happening. Actually, I can say, Joaquim, that I wish going back in time, and I think everything happened perfectly because there was a balance, but myself, I could have focused a little bit more in the academic side.
Yes.
I would have suffered a little less because we went to a very good school, the American School, the Escola Americana do Rio de Janeiro, the American School of Rio de Janeiro, which we're also very grateful for. Both Joaquim and myself, we spent pretty much our entire school life there. I think I went 1 year to the British school. You went a little bit more to the British school?
Yeah, I left in 3rd grade.
So it was very important. But
So going back, I agree. I think that it was different times, and I would say at least the same. And I think it's very important. Nowadays we have the concept of valuing and having the synergy between the academic confidence and the physical confidence in our wall, and that was very important for our dad. So as Professor Gui was going to talk about, swimming and horseback riding was part of that development of confidence in our youth. My dad believed that the contributions of knowing how to horseback ride and knowing how to control a horse, an animal that is much bigger than you as being a kid, and being able to control that animal, and being able to get over obstacles with that animal. It was really something that was a big part of our upbringing. I remember I used to practice horseback riding weekly, and we continued to practice until a later age.
And he always connected it to the psychological aspect, right? As you described very well about being able to control an animal of that size, the confidence that gives to a child. There's so many great therapeutic exercises with horses nowadays. And also swimming, and the importance of swimming and knowing how to swim psychologically. So, and he always talked about how those 3 activities were practiced by the samurai children. And our father was always studying samurai philosophy, and he always, I remember when I was a kid, he always talked about Japan and Japanese kids and how they knew how to fight and ride the horse and swim, and that was always present in our lives.
I remember being thrown in the water and having to try to survive. You remember that, or no? Was that something that happened to you? Our father just threw me in the water a couple of times.
Yes. And taking swimming lessons. And I remember where, a lot of my friends would go to vacation, they would travel, and that regimen that my dad would create for us to be able to continue to practice all of those disciplines would continue throughout our vacation.
Very important.
And even when, we had time off, if he had the opportunity, like we would come to Miami in my youth. Pedro was living here already, going to school, Gui also. And while we were here, if we had the opportunity to be able to further our training in any of those disciplines, he would always, engage us as much as possible, because for my dad, there was no time to rest, even though rest is very important, but he wanted us to work hard as much as we could.
Yeah, no, what Joaquim said now I think is super important. Another lesson that is very, very meaningful to us, and I think that can really benefit children. We, like most kids, of course, we wanted to play, we wanted to have fun with our friends, but our father saw vacation from school an opportunity for us to really practice areas that sometimes because of school we couldn't dedicate so much time to it. So I just went back in time now, Joaquim, when you said that, but I remember as soon as we were out of school, and I remember that many of my friends, they would go to trips and ski trips and different trips, and we would stay home, maybe go to some different areas in Brazil, in Rio, but we would have a swimming teacher 3 times a week. Then we would have the judo teachers. And of course, as we got older, we could then go to different places, go to locations, go to a club, go to a specific school. But the education never stopped. And there was this balance. Yes, sometimes going back now in time, you felt maybe I could have spent more time focusing on one of the areas, but he believed in this balance, in this very balanced approach, which is one of the models, maybe the main model today of Valente Brothers.
Because we want to give our students the ability to learn all these different elements here. So they can get the whole package, the complete package here. Since we're not focusing on tournaments and we don't need to specialize in that, we can teach our students a complete approach.
And sometimes when parents ask me, but talking about kids program, but I want my child to practice martial arts, jiu-jitsu with you guys every day. And what do we say? Look, that's not necessary. Actually, we suggest that you enroll your child in maybe a swimming program.
Correct.
Or a group sports program, or in something that we all did, which was arts and music, which was all part of our upbringing.
Correct.
Now, one subject that I think is important for us to talk about, and many times we talk to parents about, Professor Pedro, do you remember not wanting to train jiu-jitsu or not wanting to go to jiu-jitsu class?
Not too much, but yes, obviously as a child, there are moments where you want to, as Gui just said, you want to hang out with your friends, you want to go do other things. And our father was very, very strict with jiu-jitsu and the importance of not missing class. But yes, there were moments that I didn't want to go,
Gui?
and I'm very thankful that our father was strict like that.
Yeah, I would say exactly the same thing. And what I felt was that jiu-jitsu and even swimming or horseback riding, but specifically if we talk about the martial arts, the weight was exactly the same. So the same way that we had to go to school, that there was no option, we had to go to school. We also had to practice jiu-jitsu. I talk to parents today that tell me, no, I want my child who is 5 years old or 6 or 7 years old, I want him to choose what he wants to do. And I respect, of course, that approach, but that was definitely not our father's approach.
Why? Because it's like school. To him, jiu-jitsu was not an extracurricular activity. Jiu-jitsu was part of our education. So for the same reason that a parent would not allow a child to stop going to school, our father did not allow us to stop going to jiu-jitsu.
Correctly. And with all due respect, a 6-year-old, I'm very happy that when I was a child, I did not get to make my own choices, that my father was the one choosing what was happening. Now, he did that in a very tactful way. Our parents, our mother, of course, they were a team together doing all that. And going back to your question, Joaquim, I trusted my father. Even if I felt like I did not want to do something, the way he talked to us, often saying, look, I think if you don't want to do it, right? I think he used that with all of us. If you don't want to go to jiu-jitsu, that's okay. But I think you should.
Yes, and we also must remember that our father was a great psychologist, a great student of psychology. And he knew each one of us individually. And that's important as well, knowing the child. He knew each one and he adapted his approach. It's not that he did exactly the same thing for the three of us. As the older brother, I would many times notice that he would use a different approach with each one of you. And that was part of his genius. Not just having one approach, but adapting the approach, the same mission, the same direction, the same ideal, but the ability to be flexible with the approach. One thing that I remember so clearly about my childhood was the importance that he gave to nutrition and to exercise. Nutrition and exercise. In addition to these activities that we did go into jiu-jitsu, but now I'm talking about at home. Eating was very important. So you only eat when it's time to eat. You don't snack. You need to learn what foods are positive and what foods are negative. If a food is negative, you just don't eat it. And it's not that he was prohibiting us. He would explain to us as a doctor the reason, and he would convince us, and he made us feel like that was like a family thing for all of us. And that made it very strong in our hearts. And also all the love and all the care made us not want to disappoint him.
Yeah, and each other. I think
And each
that's
other.
I think, by the way, that's the key. That's the key. The sense of almost a tribe,
Yes.
right? The Valente tribe. And we don't want to disappoint each other. We want to be there for each other. And that means following this code, which later, and we're going to talk more about it in the
Because-
future, the 753 code.
Because many times when we look at just the nutrition, for example, and we talk to people about the nutrition, and they ask, but when you were 4 years old, 5 years old, you were able to not eat certain foods and make those decisions. And if you look at just that aspect, it's hard to understand how can a kid at that age be able to make those decisions. And I think the answer is really how everything connects, how the development of discipline was created in other areas, in being engaged in so many activities since early on, and having the discipline and developing the discipline in those different activities. And I believe that when Professor Gui spoke about not disappointing each other, that was something that, especially me being the youngest, I could always feel from both of you in creating that connection with me, and as much as possible kind of showing me the way, but at the same time expecting for me to be able to follow those same steps. And the connection between everything for me was always extremely important, because I saw that as the continuation of a legacy that had been created by our ancestors and that will continue for a long time.
Exactly. And going back to the exercises, because that's something that was very, very significant in my childhood. Our father would tell me, whenever he came home, let's go exercise. And he had this whole set of sit-ups and jumping squats, and all these body weight exercises. We lived in a house that had a hill. Whenever he was driving me home, he would tell me, get out of the car. When we were it was a long way up to get to our house. And he would say, get out of the car. And I had to run home many times at night. And so those exercises and those routines were not easy for me. They were tough, and he was very strict, and he made me finish. And even when I was tired, he made me keep going. And that was a very important part in my upbringing, because it taught me how to deal with adversity, how to take pain, how to keep moving forward even when things are not comfortable, how to deal with discomfort, this sense of mission. You have to finish. He would tell me, do 200 sit-ups. I was 10 years old. 200 sit-ups, go, in one of those boards. And I remember 100, 120, I'm tired. Keep going. Let's go.
I remember watching you.
What do you remember from watching?
Him being very hard on you sometimes, and I would be just laughing and giggling on the side. So, no, that's very true. And finding comfort in uncomfortable positions, that's something that through martial arts and through exercise and through all these activities, he really worked hard to understanding that that's life, right? Understanding that life is not easy, and understanding that life presents many battles and many challenges. He and that formal education, academic education, many times maybe on an intellectual level, but physically, emotionally, it does not create that. And he, through all these different activities, he made a point to do that. Of course, that in jiu-jitsu and in boxing and in judo and in different competitions and in different situations, that already comes by itself. But he also added a lot of pressure.
I felt that it was very important to our father that we did not become spoiled, that we were not feeling entitled. He wanted us to work hard, to understand the value of hard work, to deal with discomfort, to understand that life is not given to us, that nothing is given to us, that we have to battle, that we have to fight. And he constantly reminded us of that. What was one of his favorite sayings that he repeated all the time until his last days? Ovo não nasce em geladeira.
Eggs don't come from the fridge.
Yes.
So, but with that, I think it's important for us already trying to finalize this episode.
And we'll leave the Miami part.
Yes, for the
part
next
2.
one. We have to talk about the importance, and I think it's very nice for our audience to get to know our father a little bit through this. You were born still in an apartment in the neighborhood of Ipanema in English. And as soon as our father, I think he figured it out. I think he planned that he wanted to have more children. He wanted to build a larger family. He started working on a house, and he picked a certain location. Of course, Rio, such a beautiful place. There's so many amazing natural, you're in contact with nature in so many different locations. And he found the house that you referred to with the hills. It was on a hill.
In the middle of the rainforest.
The middle of the rainforest. And he had a reason for that. We were raised in that compound. We were raised bare feet. We were raised climbing trees. Interestingly, also, for those of you that know Rio de Janeiro, many of the hills, many of the nice areas of Rio, and we were privileged because our father became a very successful doctor, and he gave us the opportunity to live in a very nice home. But many of the nice areas are also in neighborhoods that are neighboring some of the slums. And like you said, that you felt that our father did not want us to be spoiled kids, he actually made us visit these slums, and we became friends with kids from the slums, and we would go play soccer in the slums. And he would much rather have us go play soccer with the kids in the slums than go to the country club.
Correct.
Which he actually did not want us to go there.
Too much, yes.
Too much. The only one that he liked was the horseback riding one. We were going there with the mission to learn how to ride horses.
Yes.
But not to hang out, and he would rather have us do that. Either go to Grandmaster Helio's house or spend time playing soccer and playing with the kids from the slums. Why was that?
Because he thought that...
Rio was a lot safer back then. We were fortunate, but...
Because of the values. He felt that there were very strong values in those neighborhoods. That even though those people might not have money, that they had strong moral values, and they understood the value of work. Our father really believed in the value of work, and sometimes people who have a lot of money, especially money that was given to them, and there's nothing wrong with that. As you said, we were very privileged growing up, but he wanted to make sure that we understood the value of things and the value of work. And that's why he encouraged us to be around every type of human being.
And he was like that in his social interactions.
100%.
You know, without, this could be a full other episode for the podcast, but he was involved with music. He was involved with horseback riding. He was involved with plastic surgery, with soccer. And that gave him the opportunity to meet and to be around all different kinds of people of all different social levels. And I think to answer Professor Gui's question, the reason why he wanted it, because he wanted us to be able to have some of that also.
Yes, and to be able to deal with every type of person and
Yep.
to know how to deal with every type of human being in a positive way.
But going back to the house, because I really believe that that house, if we could choose a location where all of the philosophy, all of the lessons that we had in our life, if there was one location that represented all that, it was really that home. Because there was a mat in which we trained many times. For me, it was extremely important because when Professor Pedro and Gui were already here in Miami teaching, that's where I started to teach. I was first helping Professor Hélio in the Academia Gracie and teaching there. And then I started to teach private classes at home. And I had a group of maybe, 10 or 12 students that used to come weekly.
All your friends from school.
Yeah, most of my friends from school were basically coming to take classes from me. And that was really important in my, professor
Preparation.
preparation, coming to the United States. One more thing to talk about at home also that I think was extremely important, and Professor Pedro touched on, was the importance that our dad always gave to exercise. I think that was even maybe influenced by his connection to the United States. He was a very big fan of how, the American culture in the universities, in the professional, teams.
Yeah, that's why he chose the American school for
The
us.
American
Even in
school.
the school system, lower school, high school, competitive sports.
And he believed that exercise
With ideally, even though sometimes it doesn't happen that way, but with the balance of academic development and
sports.
competitive, yeah.
Because in schools in Brazil, it's not very common. You only have the academic, you don't have the sports.
And inside of our house, we had a gym. I think we always had a gym, at least in my upbringing in that home.
Yeah, when you were growing up, it was a nicer one. When we were younger, it was just a little corner.
But I saw the
What's a
transition
little corner with the
in the
board?
balcony.
Yes.
Yes, I got that, and then later it became bigger in the balcony, and then later he actually made a full gym that I had the privilege to be able to work out there multiple times a week, and that's one of the things
That's why you're a little stronger.
that's one of the things that my dad liked the most, was to see us training and to see us, training martial arts and to see us working out.
Yeah, and that house was part of the plan, as you guys said. It was a plan for us not to grow up inside of an apartment. He wanted us to grow up outdoors. So in that house we could swim. There was a swimming pool.
He actually had, when you say plan, again, for all of you who are listening to get to know our father, he chose a location that he knew back then in the late 70s, early 80s, that as far as late 70s, as far as a real estate investment, it was a worse investment than the homes that he had in the Joatinga, the apartment he had in Vieira Soto.
That I lived for the first 6 years of my life.
Correct. And he chose a location. He was not thinking about a real estate investment. That's so unique, right? Even us thinking about our lives today. He just wanted a place that he thought was good for a compound to kind of isolate us in ways if that was necessary, to isolate the family if it was necessary, but also to give us this access to nature.
So you had the swimming pool. We were in the swimming pool a lot. Bicycles. We could ride our bicycles in that compound. Also the hills that we always ran, those hills, very steep. There was a very steep hill inside the
property,
house that he would say, go 5 times up, down and up, down and up.
And on the nutrition side, I think at my time it developed even more. But basically we had fruits that were all from, the trees inside the house.
From the beginning.
Yes, with the fruits, yes. We had a cow.
Yes, that we did.
We had a cow, so the milk was from the cow that we had inside the house, which we would do butter. We used to do cheese, chickens. So not only,
The cow had a name or no? Carola.
Carola, that's true. We went through a couple, but one of them was Carola. And the type of cow was the, Jersey, I think, Jersey.
Yeah.
Jersey. And we also had chickens. We had ducks. We had geese.
Yeah, which he said was good to protect.
Also.
They're very...
Yes. Yeah. They're very aggressive.
Yes.
Or they can be aggressive. We had a fish inside the house. We had some fish tanks, and he was bringing up fish. And so basically, at one point, we were almost self-sufficient. We had 2 wells inside the house, so we had, very clean water. The house basically self-sufficient.
And he loved animals, right?
He had a generator.
We had a generator.
He loved animals. He loved dogs. He loved horses a lot. And he was really, really someone who loved animals.
We had, at one point, almost 20 dogs.
Yeah. At one point, 25 dogs in the house.
Yeah, between Rottweilers, the Fila
Brazilian
Fila.
The Brazilian Mastiff.
It's a Mastiff. And there were also some Pit Bulls. Right?
Pit Bulls, Bull Terriers, American Staffordshire.
And the alarm system was...
The Jack Russell dog.
Jack Russell
In
dog.
my time, it was not a Jack Russell. It was another street dog that we got. His name was Alarm.
Yes.
Alarm.
One last thing on the exercise that I wanted to share, which is for me very interesting, was a conversation of our dad with Grandmaster Helio. Because I used to go to spend time at Grandmaster Helio's house, and sometimes, just a weekend during the time that I was in school, but sometimes when I was in vacation, a full month. And my dad used to come to visit during my break. He used to come in the weekends. My sister used to go to the mountains a lot with the horses, and my dad used to go there visit. And I remember that my dad was having a conversation with Grandmaster Helio about the importance of exercise, and not only the exercise for the practice of jiu-jitsu, but also the importance of exercise at a later age. And Grandmaster Helio always worked out in my time being that I used to be at his house in the mountains. I remember sometimes waking up earlier, and I used to go to the kitchen to drink some water, or to see where Grandmaster Helio was, and he wasn't expecting me to be up that early, and I would find him laying down in the living room of the house with his legs on top of the chair doing sit-ups. And he used to do, he was already 85, also after 90. He used to do 50, 60, 100 sit-ups. He would do some push-ups. So he always had that regimen of working out. And my dad saying how important.
Squats.
And squats. My dad always telling him the importance of doing squats.
That old age comes in through the legs, our father would tell him. So he would always repeat that. Your father told me that old age comes in through the legs, so I don't want to get old. I keep doing squats. And our father always told us that he had to be careful with how he told Grandmaster Helio about these exercises, because he would tell Grandmaster Helio to do 10 and Grandmaster Helio would do 100.
Because of his discipline, yeah. And Grandmaster Helio and our dad were two very strong men as far as their convictions.
Yeah, strong-minded.
Strong-minded and, with conviction about their ideas. But I don't think there was anybody that would have the ability to make them think sometimes and not change their opinions, but to allow them to think in a different way than one to another. Sometimes our dad would have an idea, and he would talk to Grandmaster Helio, and Grandmaster Helio would say something, and he would later think and sometimes adapt that idea. And same thing, Grandmaster Helio. He would call our dad asking for an opinion or to talk about something. You would see that happening. And, it was really admirable to see that friendship and how that friendship only grew until the day that both Grandmaster Helio and our dad passed.
It's funny. I agree with you 100%, and that's definitely the best answer, between themselves. But I thought you were going to say us. And that is important, because, as we speak about our father, you might be thinking about a rigid person, but he would also listen to us. And I always felt, and I'm sure you guys felt as well, very respected by him. He respected us as human beings. He would listen to us. He respected our intelligence. And that gave us a lot of confidence, and that made us want to follow him. Because many times when parents are too strict and too imposing, and they force you to do things, then you get many times a rejection from the children. And he didn't get that from us. And people ask me all the time, how was your father able to do this? And I think the main ingredient is this absolute respect and love that he had for us.
I agree. I would say that the word respect really came about. Well, respect can be defined in different ways. But as we got older, I felt there was a change. When we proved that we were capable of what we did, I think that he really admired that, and he really appreciated that. And then I really felt that respect. As a kid, I felt his responsibility. I felt that he was always trying his best, both with my...
The respect was there. The respect was there. I think it's just that he basically had goals that he wanted with us, and that was the most important thing.
Yeah,
And he was not looking to bend away too much from his, objectives and his strategies that he put a lot of time into it. And through experiences and through maybe even an evolution of what happened to you and then to Professor Gui and then to me, almost like an iPhone. No, I'm just kidding. But, I think he really, had his way, and it was basically that way. It doesn't mean that he wouldn't change. And that's why I think Grandmaster Helio had an influence over him and he had an influence over Grandmaster Helio. But what Professor Pedro described, I agree. And I think those are skills of a great leader, right? I think those are skills of a great leader.
Yeah, because he admired us. I felt when I was 8 years old that he admired me as an 8-year-old. When I was a 12-year-old, he admired me as a 12-year-old. But I agree 100% with what you're saying.
I think that now, so yes, he admired us. Sometimes to the point that I would ask myself, am I that good?
Yes.
Because it really seems my dad thinks highly of me.
Yes.
But the respect that you mentioned in that sense of the word, and it's something very special for me. I felt that when we began our life here in Miami, our solo life, and he really wanted that. He felt that that was very important for our development, to kind of allow us, because he was so from a distance many times. My mom, of course, as I said, more present. My dad, more distant because of work. But because it was so much, like Joaquim said, and you used the word engineering process, there was a system for us. He felt that when we went to college, he had to allow us to fly our solo flights. And when we began to prove to him that we were ready, not only doing well in school, but most importantly, to the point that after a few years, you first, and then all of us, we were completely self-sufficient, which is not common, right? At an early age, I felt my dad now really respects me. Now it's just not the admiration, it's not just him trying to pump me up. It's really wanting to listen to me and wanting to know my opinions on different topics.
And now that I have a son, I think of my teenage years. 13 years old, I went to America by myself with some of Grandmaster Helio's sons. And I spent there 1 month. And then 14 years old, I went again. 15 years old, I went again. Stayed with Hélio Gracie in his house. Stayed with Hickson as well in his house. Stayed with the Machados as well. I stayed with a lot of different people. And those experiences were so enriching. But now looking back and thinking, wow, I was only 13 years old. And he trusted me to go by myself. And that is something that happened to you guys as well as you traveled, as you came here. And I had you come to spend time with me. And it's fascinating, and we can spend hours and hours discussing our father's education, Grandmaster Helio's philosophy. But to wrap it up, I just feel very, very thankful. And we're recording this on Thanksgiving Day. And I feel very, very grateful that we had these two amazing mentors in our lives. And I really feel that all our success comes from them.
Very well said. And the trust, I think, is really something that for you to earn someone's trust, you have to trust that person. And I think you said it perfectly. Even when we were very young, as soon as he got to know us, and that's very important, he taught us that you have to know someone before you can trust them. And we felt that he trusted us. And we felt that there was a tribe. We felt that we were part of a group and that we had a responsibility as members of that group. I was going to say that we were recording today on Thanksgiving Day, and for us it's very important. Hopefully in a few days we will be publishing this to all our friends. This podcast has been on the works for years. Finally, And this is no surprise, but Joaquim was the one that put it together.
So many of our students and friends have encouraged us to do this throughout the years.
And provided great advice and ideas. But Joaquim, as usual, is the one that put this together. We're here at the Valente Brothers Library in our headquarters in North Miami Beach. We will still, as usual, be making improvements and making this better and better. Hopefully, eventually, with, if possible, with multiple cameras. But I think we're very happy. We are very happy that we were able to accomplish this, and this episode 1, I'm sure will be historic. And we talked about something that is very valuable to us, our family, our upbringing, our past. And I think it's very fitting that today is Thanksgiving, and I would like to thank all of you. Joaquim.
Yes, great sense of gratitude for our ancestors, Grandmaster Helio, our dad, Grandmaster Dr. Pedro Valente, and gratitude for all of our support from our students, from all of our family members. The Valente Brothers family is not just the 3 of us, but every single member, people around the world that support us and that are with us in everything we do. And very happy in being able to do this podcast here today in our building. This building was something that we worked extremely hard to be able to create for all of our students. You know, many times I think about it and I'm like, there's no better investment that we could have made after having the school that started with Professor Pedro, then Professor Gui, then I came, and that was open for, you know, many, many years. And with that hard work, there was no better investment than creating this for our students. We spend every day here with our students, if it's on the mat, if it's now on the tactical side, and to be able to have this as our home is the biggest investment that we have ever made. And now to be able to do a podcast here and, you know, have this connection with so many friends and so many viewers and listeners from around the world is really going to be something amazing. So I'm very happy to have been able to have our first podcast in Thanksgiving Day. So thank you very much, everyone.
And Joaquim, who put this together here today, but he was also instrumental in the building process of the school. And it's important to say, we had the opportunity today to share our stories about where we grew up, our home. And this school, a lot of it, maybe the biggest inspiration for this building is our home that we just described, where we were in contact with nature, where we had the opportunity to train and have this healthy lifestyle.
Yes, and the legacy continues. We're here in the Valente Brothers Library, and as I look at these books, I see some books that were purchased by my father in the 50s, and our mission is to continue this wonderful work.
So, thank you so much. Please let everyone know about this episode. Remember to join our different social media platforms. Subscribe to YouTube. I don't even know what exactly you have to do. Share.
Send feedback.
Send feedback, please. Leave your comments. That's really important for us. We want to know what you would like to share with us and how these stories have impacted you, your life, your family. I think this is also very important for us. So thank you so much, and let's continue to do this together.
So long.
Thank you.